Fandom isn't luck, it's built. Our guest today is David Meerman Scott, best-selling author and marketing thinker whose work inspired the film Fly Me to the Moon. From rock bands to rocket launches, David shows how passion, storytelling, and community turn audiences into loyal fans.
Is there something that you can provide for free that would serve as a way to provide something of value to create fans? Just do things for the fans. Don't just do what your investors would want you to do or what you think would bring in the most money. Do what would be best for the fans. The fans will treat you right.
Welcome, everybody, to Difference Talks. We have David Meerman Scott today. He is an author. He focuses on a phenomenally interesting topic, fandom. We all want fans. We're fans of something ourselves. He wrote a book. We're going to talk a lot about that, but then we're going to talk about some of his other books as well. The first book we're going to talk about is Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. It's fascinating. David, how about a little bit of a background on you, and then I have some questions for you, and we're going to dig into fandom.
Sure. Hey, Barry, it's great to see you. I've been looking forward to doing this conversation. I was a corporate marketing guy and kept getting fired because I had radical ideas on what a marketing person is. So went out on my own in about 25 years ago. And have written 12 books since then. Books have sold 1 million copies, 30 languages. And as you said, I'm fascinated by this idea of fandom, how and why people become fans of something. And a lot of that's been informed ever since I was a teenager about the things that I love. I mean, why in the world would I go to 111 Grateful Dead concerts? What's that all about? Or digging deep into surfing, so much so that I actually built this surfboard. I went to a company called Grain Surfboards in York, Maine, for 4 days to build a wooden surfboard. What the hell is that all about? And I find myself driven to a kinder, gentler, more human, more in-person approach to marketing that fandom can deliver than all of the social media algorithm-driven AI-created dreck that's going on now, which is just everybody trying to shout louder and louder than everybody else. And so I guess stumbled on the idea of fandom and have just been writing about it a lot. And I think its time has really come.
I agree with you. I love the concept of fandom. The book I wrote, The Power of Differentiation, talks about experience and building fans and building loyalty, which is very opposite from, as you said, something that's going to be an AI algorithm, something that's going to be yelling at you over and over again. We all want fans. We love to have fans of ours, and we are fans. I'll share a little bit on my Grateful Dead observations, and I'd like us to riff back and forth if we can, kind of like musicians riff back and forth. I was never a Grateful Dead fan, as in loving their music. I wrote a lot of songs. I liked other styles of music. I was absolutely taken by the loyalty and literally fanatic behavior of their fans. One thing I found that was astounding that at first, David, I didn't get was they would have, let's say, 5 concerts in a row, let's say in LA. And the same people, 60% of the audience was the same every night. They go back and back and back and back and back. At first, I didn't get it. And then it astounded me. One thing they did that was genius, and it wasn't easy, was they performed literally a different set every night, which meant there was a reason to go back again. They weren't those guys that had 2 or 3 hits and then had 12 songs that they played every tour, and you see them once, you're done. Every night was new. Share what their thought was on that. I know that's in your book, but I think that was one of their secrets.
Absolutely, that was one of their secrets. So they wouldn't repeat a set list in, say, LA over 6 nights, But even the next night when they're in San Francisco or Seattle or whatever, if they play a song that they played in LA, they'll play it differently. Maybe in LA they'd play Cosmic Charlie and it would be 15 minutes long, and then it'd be 7 minutes long the next time they played it. So you just never know what they're going to do. And that was actually part of it, was you don't know where they're going to, as an audience member, you don't know where they're going to take you. You don't know in what direction. You don't know if that's going to be a great show. Oh my gosh, I loved that show. Or it's like, that was kind of a dud. I had fun, but maybe they were a little off. Maybe one of them had a cold tonight or whatever. And so you just never knew what was going to happen. And it wasn't that they set out to, let's create a way to market us that people will want to come back, so we're never going to repeat a song when we're in a city. It's not as planned and plotted as that, but it turned out to be a brilliant strategy. And the other thing that they did that fed into that in a big way, no other band was doing it, was they allowed their fans to record those concerts. So you could bring professional level recording gear into a Grateful Dead concert starting in the late 70s. And that was allowed. Not only was it allowed, you could buy a ticket in the taper section, which is right behind the mixing board. You could put a microphone stand up into the air. They even had power strips you could plug your gear into. And so people recorded Grateful Dead concerts. And as you mentioned, 6 shows, they'd all be different. And then initially it was cassette tapes. I did this with my friends. I didn't record shows, but I did trade tapes with my friends. If you get a tape, it's like, oh, this is really great. And then you would trade it. You'd make a copy and trade it with your friends. And they didn't proactively say, let's figure out a marketing strategy where we'll get people to share our music, which will then get them to buy concert tickets. They didn't say it quite like that. I actually spoke with Bobby Weir about that topic, guitarist and singer-songwriter for the Grateful Dead. And what he told me was, no, we just want to do right by the fans. If the fans wanted to record the shows and it wasn't bothering other people and it wasn't bothering us, let's figure out a way they could do that. But that's how I was exposed to the music for the first time when I was about 14 or 15 years old. The kid across the street who's a couple of years older was playing the music coming out of his room. I could hear it when I was outside. It's like, that's really great. What's that? Oh, that's the Grateful Dead. And then here's a tape. He gave it to me. And 111 concerts later, and a book later. So those kinds of things really helped them to create what our mutual friend Seth Godin would call a tribe of like-minded people, and served to market the band, to get them the exposure of new people listening to those cassette tapes in dorm rooms or car stereos, and later on MP3 files. So it's super interesting.
It is. When I was in the same era, what was the norm was, number one, you're not allowed to record at a concert.
Yeah,
okay, you're not.
What everybody said.
Right. And what happened was somebody would hide a cassette recorder in a purse or something. And I mean a tiny little piece of crap cassette recorder. They would then get into the auditorium, sit somewhere in the middle or in the back, wherever, and press record. So you'd hear people talking, you hear people coughing, sneezing, rustling the thing, and it was terrible. What the Dead did was unbelievable, because they not only allowed that, they said, no, come back to where the mixing board is, because that's where we have the best sound, because the guys doing the mixing want to hear the sound the best, so they're the ones that are mixing it. And by the way, we'll plug into the cord or into the box, and you'll be able to record it at a very high level. Shocking. Absolutely shocking, and it is exactly the opposite of what the industry was allowing.
And then what was fascinating is, and I forget the date, but call it 25 years ago, they started to release these concert recordings that they themselves had recorded. So they have an archive of thousands of their concerts that they had recorded over the years using professional gear, of course. And so then they would clean them up professionally. they would then create a cover and sell them as an album. Either initially it was all CDs, but then downloadable files as well. And I've spoken with many people who already had a cassette tape or a data file of a particular show, but they wanted a better quality one, the one that was produced by the band, so much so that when these things are released, they sell a lot of copies, 10 or 20,000 copies each. And that doesn't sound like a lot if you're thinking of millions of copies of a Taylor Swift song or something. But when you're talking about many, many hundreds of these potential recordings that are out there, each one selling 10, 20, 30, 40,000 copies, or in the case of some of their box sets, way more than that. And the band is making money selling recorded albums of concerts that they did 40, 50 years ago. And they just broke the record, the world record for the most albums that are on the Billboard 200, because every one of these that comes out hits that Billboard 200, and they've got, I don't remember the number, but a lot of albums that have hit that. So I just find all of that aspect of fandom to be so, so fascinating about what they've done to build a tribe of like-minded people. I mean, I'm a Grateful Dead fan, and I met my co-author, Brian Halligan, who's the CEO, co-founder, former CEO of HubSpot, because he's a fan. We never would have become friends. We never would have written this book together if we hadn't bonded over our mutual love of the Grateful Dead. So, I mean, just fascinating.
But one thing was, again, this is backwards or upside down from the way the industry behaves today, let alone back then.
Yes.
They focused on concerts rather than albums. They were about their concerts. Most of the bands, 99.99% of the bands said, okay, we're going to do an album and we're going to go do concerts to support the album. The Dead did the opposite. Yes. What happened there when you talked with Weir or talked with some of the other guys? Why did that just come to fruition?
Well, first of all, they loved, especially in the early days, they loved to play. They wanted to play together. They were eager to get onto a stage and play together. And they sold a lot of tickets. And so they turned it into a machine of touring. And another element was that they spent a lot of money on gear to be allowed to do those shows. And you can't see it from where I am right now, but I've got a Macintosh MC2300 amplifier that was used in the Wall of Sound sitting over on my right shoulder over here. Because I'm such a geek, I have to collect gear from the Grateful Dead. But they realized that a viable business model is to do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. If everyone else is selling through, at the time, Ticketron, which sort of Ticketmaster is the equivalent today. If everyone's selling through Ticketron, hey, maybe it's better to sell direct so we can sell directly to our fans, which they did. They created their own distribution system for the best seats in the house at their shows. Or if everybody else is going through an established record label, maybe we should create our own record label. Or as you said, if everyone else is making money from their records and touring to support the records to sell more records, maybe we should make money by touring and records are something secondary. So I think that they constantly thought about, and what Bob Weir told me was, David, we just focused on the fans and we always just did things for what we thought was going to be best for them, not what was best to make money, but ironically, it made them a lot of money.
Well, and it did. And to put this in perspective, it was 60 years ago that they started up. They started 60 years ago. It was, I believe, wasn't it 30 years ago that Jerry Garcia passed away? Right. So let's put this in perspective. They're as popular as ever, 60 years from when they were founded, 30 years from when their co-founders passed away. It's unheard of. What are the major lessons that you feel we as business people really need to learn from the Grateful Dead?
Create content that you can deliver for free, or better yet, look into your archives, look into your databases, try to figure out if there's some kind of data that you already own that you could just simply make available for free. Like we talked about, the Grateful Dead allowed fans to record their concerts. That created the data being the recording of the concert, which then they allowed people to share. One of my favorite examples of that is an insurance company. They're called Haggerty. Haggerty is the leading insurance company worldwide for classic cars. I own a 1973 Land Rover, one of my other passions, vintage Land Rovers, and Haggerty insures it. But what Haggerty realized is that they had data on the actual insured values of tens of thousands of different models of classic cars, because they insure millions of classic cars. So they decided to make that data available for free, simply going to their database and typing in year, make, model, bang, and then it gives you a range from a poor condition to a classic car show level condition car, what that range is, so that you could find out what your car is worth using actual values. Many business people would say, that's insane. Why would you give that data away for free? Maybe you should sell that data, or maybe don't give it away at all because it's proprietary. And Haggerty said, hey, let's put it out there, because that will build fans, by the way, of a product everyone hates, car insurance. That will build fans, and then those fans, some of them, but not all of them, might want to insure their classic car with us because they learn about who we are, which is exactly what happened to me. So the lesson for business people is there something that you can provide for free that would serve as a way to provide something of value to create fans? And then I'm referring back to Bob Weir's quote, just do things for the fans. Don't just do what your investors would want you to do or what you think would bring in the most money. Do what would be best for the fans. The fans will treat you right. What I've seen again and again and again with organizations of all kinds is when you have true fans, people will do business with you even if a low-cost provider comes along. It's like, no, I'm fine. I'm good. I've got Haggerty insurance. I don't need a lower cost car insurance company. It's going to give me $200 cheaper car insurance. I like Haggerty. I think they're great. They've always stood by me. I'm going to continue with them. So doing things for those fans is really, really important. We also touched on this idea. The Grateful Dead sound was incredible, always has been, still is. I went to the 6 shows at the Sphere with Dead & Company, which is one of the current offshoots of the Grateful Dead, with a couple members of the original band in it. And by the way, John Mayer as the Jerry Garcia role. Yeah. And the sound was absolutely freaking stellar. So they've always been about great sound. And the lesson here is, what technology can you apply to your business? Not just technology for technology's sake, but how can you use technology in a way that can help you to build fans? So I just touched on a couple of those ideas, but there's many, many lessons that all people, business people, can learn from what the Grateful Dead did.
David, this is fascinating. We're going to come back, and after we're done with break, we're going to now pivot to the moon. And David's going to talk about another one of his books, which is fascinating. We'll be right back.
Difference Talks is a LaBeouf production. Our focus is differentiation, and we believe it's more important than ever to differentiate your brand and experience. Contact us at LaBeouf.com for a conversation. We'd love to connect with you.
All right, we are back from break. We have David Meerman Scott. We have been talking about a phenomenon known as the Grateful Dead, and it's all about building fandom. David, you wrote a book. Share it. If you have it there, you can show it. It's all about the moon.
This is Marketing the Moon. Came out a couple years ago. Marketing the Moon, I'm a huge fan of the Apollo lunar program. I was 8 years old when Apollo 11 landed, first humans to land on the moon, and I was utterly fascinated. My other friends were like, I grew up in the New York City area, the New York Mets, the New York Yankees, they're into sports and whatever. And I was, as an elementary school student, absolutely fascinated by us humans going to the moon. That's crazy. I read books about going to the moon, and I just became a huge fan. And it was always in the back of my mind of how interesting that was. And then when I'm quite a bit older, into my 40s, I realized, that was a really interesting time in history. We went to the moon using 1960s technology. That's insane. And so I started to read more about it. And then, because I'm a marketing guy, I'm like, how in the world did NASA convince the American public to spend 2% of our government spending over the course of 10 years to send 12 men to the surface of the moon? That just seems like a radical thing. And so I dug in really deep over many years into this topic. I became a fan of the astronauts. I've met and spent significant time, including having dinner with a number of the men, more than half, who walked on the surface of the moon. I interviewed people from NASA. I interviewed people from that worked in the newspapers that covered the program to figure out how we were able to get to the moon from the marketing perspective. No one had ever looked at that part of the moon landings before. And it was super interesting. And they actually, remarkably, did a lot of the things that the Grateful Dead did. They allowed the content. So the NASA program with Apollo allowed real-time ground to spacecraft communications to be broadcast, radio, television, recorded, whatever, even to the point where during Apollo 13, we were able to learn in real time if the astronauts were going to live or die, because we could hear their real-time communications from Houston to the spacecraft. NASA created heroes of the astronauts. And they're government employees. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, they're government employees. And NASA figured out a way to make them heroes in the eyes of little 8-year-old me and many, many, many other people, which then built the fandom that allowed us to open our wallets. Us, not me, I was too young, but my parents and others who were paying taxes to open our wallets to send people to the moon. So the book is called Marketing the Moon, and I'm absolutely thrilled that it's a marketing book, Barry. You get that?
Yeah.
That it's been turned into 2 movies. A 3-part American Experience miniseries called Chasing the Moon, based on my book Marketing the Moon. And last year, 2024, a romantic comedy, Hollywood, big budget Hollywood film called Fly Me to the Moon, starring Scarlett Johansson, Channing Tatum, Woody Harrelson, and Ray Romano, was based on my book Marketing the Moon. So who says a marketing book author can't have a film? I've had 2 films based on that book. But again, I dig in deep to something I love, something I become a fan of. How can we learn, we meaning all business people, learn from that particular thing, whether it's the Grateful Dead or it's the Apollo lunar program or other sort of obscure, interesting things that I like? How can people, what can people learn from that?
I'm in general same age as you. I remember the first Man on the Moon. I watched it on TV with my family. What did they do to be able to position these men? Because a few of them, I mean, they would not necessarily be squeaky clean, perfect individuals.
They were not. They
Right.
were not. They smoked cigarettes, they drank, they chased women. They were not perfect.
Right. And the image was, gosh, I love these people. They're amazing. They're brilliant. And you almost didn't even connect them with being pilots. They were standalone astronauts.
Yes.
What was behind that? Because it's a brilliant approach that
It is.
NASA took on this.
So there are really there's a lot of things, but two that are worth talking about here. One of them, which I already briefly mentioned, is that NASA created an open program. In contrast with the Russians, who we're essentially competing with in the 1960s to become the first people to land on the moon, the first nation to land on the moon, the Russians had a closed program. You wouldn't learn about a space shot until the rocket actually went up in Russia. And you wouldn't learn of the status of that until the mission was completed or it crashed or something else happened. And our program, and the American program, was the complete opposite. It was all an open program. You knew when there was a success, you knew when there was a failure as well, because it was completely open. So there's actually lessons to be learned there. Don't try to hide behind something in your company. Don't try to lie your way around it. Be open, be transparent. And so that allowed us to hear the astronauts when they were actually up in space. It allowed us to see them a little bit later, after a couple of the initial Apollo missions. We were able to have live television on the surface of the moon. And that was a super expensive thing to do because at the time, 1960s, television cameras were enormous, absolutely huge, on these big, fat, rolling tripods operated by humans. I mean, they had to have weighed 300 or 400 pounds each. How are we going to shrink that to be able to send to the surface of the moon when it costs, people suggested, $50,000 per pound to get up there? So engineers spent millions of dollars to make a television camera small enough that it could be taken to the surface of the moon so that humans could see what was going on. And then earlier than that, they could see some of the earlier missions before we actually went to the moon of what was going on in Earth orbit. Amazing. And the Russians did the complete opposite. They never shared any of those details.
What you're also saying here that I think is interesting is we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable. And that
Yes.
humanized these astronauts. They
Yes.
became people we could connect with as opposed
Yes.
to somebody in a suit that we don't really understand and don't feel close to.
Exactly right. And then they did one more thing, many things, but one more that I find absolutely fascinating is they allowed members of the media to cover all aspects of the mission and the astronauts. NASA produced all kinds of press materials that could be used. They invited journalists to go to launches and all sorts of things. However, they created an exclusive relationship with Life magazine for the stories of the astronauts' families, because the members of the media were fascinated by the astronauts' personal stories. Are they married or not? Do they have kids? Where do they live? What do they like to do when they're not working? And so what NASA said was, we're not going to be able to hide those things because there'll be reporters sneaking around in the bushes behind Neil Armstrong's house to try to capture a picture of his kids. But they sold the rights to the astronauts' personal stories to Life magazine. The astronauts themselves benefited financially from that relationship. And every other news source at the time honored this exclusive relationship. They may not have liked it, but the New York Times was off limits to ask about the astronauts' families. But it worked in the 1960s, and therefore the astronauts' stories got out there in a controlled way. And they didn't try to hide it, but they also didn't allow every single reporter on the planet to ask questions about each astronaut's wife or family.
Well, and that was smart of them. I don't think they could get away with it today, but
You really couldn't do that today, but in the 1960s, it made sense.
it did because in a way, they controlled the narrative, because if the magazine got out of control, the government could just say, hold on a minute now. We have a deal. Let's keep this thing, reasonable. Don't talk about the drinking and the carousing and stuff. Come on. This is America now. Let's keep it clean.
Yeah, that's right.
The fascinating thing, too, as we look at this is these astronauts became individuals that we connected with. They seemed like really good people. The missions overall, I mean, there were some tragedies, but the missions overall were extraordinarily successful. Yes. And what you said, David, was really on target. It seems like, well, why in the world did the government spend all this money? Well, they were spending this money, and they had to make sure that the American public did not revolt against this relatively, if you don't look at it the right way, insane, wasteful concept of sending people up to the moon when we've got poverty, we've got this, we've got that. How did NASA, behind the scenes, as you talk with a number of these people, how did they rationalize that? What was their vision of, look, we're going to do this, and this is why we think it's important?
They really focused on fandom. They truly did. They said if the American public becomes a fan of NASA and a fan of the Apollo program and a fan of the astronauts, then when we go to Congress and ask for the financial resources to be able to do these things, it'll sail through the budgeting process. And it's exactly what happened. They didn't tell the truth, which was we got to beat the Russians. They didn't try to appeal to some other aspect of it. It was fandom, and that's not necessarily the way that they sold it from the perspective of, oh yeah, we're going to build fans and that's going to allow us to do this. No, they didn't use the word fandom, but they said if we get the American public behind this, we're good. If the American public, as you just said, is not behind it, there's no way this is going to happen. It's a crazy, audacious, ridiculous project to send humans to the surface of the moon with 1960s technology. And so therefore, I find it to be utterly fascinating because I'm a student of fandom. I'm a student of how any organization or person can create fans, and to dig deep into these two different stories. We talked earlier before the break about the Grateful Dead, and we talked recently about the Apollo program. Two pretty obscure kind of things that have been successful because they realize that once you have fans, then they're going to do right by you, and that's something that can be applied to any organization.
I know that you're working on a new book. You also have some other books out there. Share a little bit about where you're going next and what you have done so that our audience can learn more about this.
Sure. So I've got this book called Fanocracy. I wrote it with my daughter. When we were writing it, she was 26 years old in med school. So I wanted a millennial mixed race woman, utterly different from me, who loves Harry Potter and K-pop, and a middle-aged white guy who loves the Grateful Dead and the Apollo program. We came together to write this book about this idea of fandom. And I'll give you two things that came from that. And I'm applying those ideas to this new book I'm writing, which will be out in late 2026. It's called The Fandom Playbook. So what we learned a number of different things. But one of them that was interesting was that fandom is basically hardwired in all humans. The reason I say that is because we all want to be part of a tribe of like-minded people. To use our mutual friend Seth Godin word, tribe, we want to be part of a tribe of like-minded people. That's when we're safe and comfortable. When I'm in a Grateful Dead concert, I'm safe and comfortable because I know it's going to happen. I know I can turn to anyone on my right or my left, and even if I never met them, start a conversation and become fast friends. And so that tribe of like-minded people idea is something that any organization can cultivate. How can you create a tribe of like-minded people? One way to do that is to bring people together in person, again, like the Grateful Dead did with their concerts. But when people are together, that is a survival technique. It's rooted in neuroscience. It goes back tens of thousands of generations, because when you're with your tribe, you're safe and comfortable. if you're not with your tribe, you're vulnerable potentially to attack. And that goes back again, tens of thousands of generations. So how can you create a tribe of like-minded people who are safe and comfortable when they're with you? That builds fans. And finally, the most interesting aspect was very surprising to us is the importance of passion. When somebody has passion for whatever it is that they do, and you don't have to share the passion, which is interesting. That passion that person has is infectious. So here I am talking about these obscure things, the Grateful Dead, the Apollo lunar program and whatnot, surfing. You don't have to like any of those things, but you might say, this guy seems pretty passionate about the things that he does. And it turns out that passion is a really important thing. As we were writing Fanocracy, my daughter and I, it was around 2017, 18, 19, in that range. The book came out in January 2020. And you know what happened right after that? The pandemic hit. My daughter's name is Reiko. Reiko, who had graduated from med school by then, and was actually out in the wild as an emergency room doctor in her residency program. During the beginning of the pandemic, when she had to treat people, she was dressed head to toe in personal protective gear. You know, she had the only thing you could see were her eyes, and even those were in front of a shield. She had a mask on, a thing in her, and gloves, and head to toe in personal protective gear. And the patients were scared. Not only were they sick and in the hospital emergency room, but the doctor that comes in looks like an alien. You can't see any of their body except for a slit for their eyes behind a plexiglass shield. And she said, Daddy, as soon as I started to show the things I'm a fan of, people lit up. I would put a pin for we live in the Boston area, the Boston Bruins, or yeah. I would have I might carry a Harry Potter book if it was a young person and show it to them and put it on next to us as we were having a conversation. And it became such a big thing that the hospital, Boston Medical Center, created sweatshirts with the sports team, with the Boston Medical Center logo and the sports team's logo, Boston Bruins and Red Sox and so on. And the patients are reacting to that. So it was really interesting for us to see how important passion is to build fans. If everyone in your organization is going through the motions, you're not going to build fans. If they're passionate about the things they do, even outside of work, it builds fans.
Fascinating. David Meerman Scott, tremendous time today. Everybody, I hope you've really enjoyed this. Remember his book, Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead, as well as his other books, Marketing the Moon, Fanocracy, and the upcoming book coming up, the playbook, which is going to be fantastic. David, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate your insights and your passion.
Thanks, Barry. It's great to have this conversation. I, too, enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thank you, everybody. Next time on Difference Talks. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on Difference Talks. All of us at LaBeouf are proud to celebrate great people with inspiring messages. Difference Talks was created, produced, engineered, and performed by the LaBeouf team. Even the music is original. Contact us at labeouf.com to learn how to differentiate your brand and give your team a sense of significance and meaning.